This morning I want to talk to you about going above and beyond and what's that mean. You know, one of the things, I'm a observer. I observe people. I observe what people do. I observe what our world's doing. And one of the things that I see is that there's a lot of people that only do what they have to. Only do what's required. They do the bare minimum. They have the mindset of, you know what, I'm working 8 to 5. It doesn't matter how hard I work because I'm going to be here till 5 o'clock no matter how hard I work. And so they just do just enough to get by. You know, Pastor Mark's been saying a lot lately. He's been sharing, you know, of course, Scripture tells us that one day we all want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. And as Pastor Mark keeps bringing up, well, to hear that, you actually have to do something to hear well done, right? Well, but is doing only what's required enough? That's what the real question of this morning is doing only what's required enough? And I'm not just talking about our spiritual walk, but I'm talking about how we are in our places of employment, how we are in our marriages and our relationships, and in all areas of our life. Is doing the bare minimum, doing just what's required enough? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 41, Jesus, he tells us here, one simple sentence here. He says, and whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. You know, and I want to talk a minute on this word about compels. He says, whoever compels you. And if you look up what the word compelled means, it means whoever forces you. It means that someone is forcing you or you're being obligated to do something. It's not just a matter of, oh, I want to, you know. It's a matter of being compelled, and there's the sense of being forced to doing something. And so we have to ask ourselves, what compels us? What drives us? What forces us to do whatever it is that we do? You know, the bottom line, I really think most people would agree with me on this, is the reason most people go to work isn't because they just love their job. They go to work for money. So, you know, if we say what compels you to get out of bed and go to work, the bottom line of it is we're going to work for money. Right? I mean, most people, normal job, right? Because otherwise, I mean, we'd do it for free, right? Right? Boy, it's quiet. You know what? I think about, you know, when you're at work and the things you're doing at work, what compels you besides the money too? You know what? Your boss. Your boss is compelling you to do whatever it is you're doing because he's the one telling you what to do, right? And you recognize that if you don't do what the boss tells you to do, then you don't have a job, and if you don't have a job, you don't have no money. It's pretty simple, right? But you know, these are some things, they compel us to do what we would do. You know, it's not really a secret, but you know, Pastor Mark tells me to do stuff sometimes that I just don't want to do. But I still do it because he compels me to do it. He's the boss, right? You know, I think about our marriages, and you know, there's a lot of married people here this morning. You know, what compels us to do the things that we do in our marriage? And unfortunately, a lot of times I think it's obligation. You know, and some of you heard me say this before, that to me, buying my wife flowers on Valentine's or anniversary type thing, you know, that's good and all well. But the thing I don't like about those holidays, or most holidays, is there's obligations. It's really, you know what, did I buy her flowers because I love my wife, or did I buy it because it's Valentine's and that's what I'm supposed to do? You know, right, both. That's the answer. Right? But you know, and then some of the things we do in our marriages too, sometimes it's just a matter of trying to keep the peace. You know, sometimes it's like, and if we're just being honest with ourselves, sometimes there's something we want to do that we don't do because it helps keep the peace. Or there's things we don't want to do that we do to help keep the peace. Okay? Some of you single guys may not have a clue what I'm talking about yet, but the day will come, maybe. I don't know if you ever get married, right? You know, another thing we do is what compels us to do the things we do in our marriage. I'm not talking about doing the bad thing. I'm talking about doing good things, you know, spending quality time together, you know, going watching a chick flick movie or you know, whatever it is. Whatever it is we do in our marriage and commitment. You know what? None of these are bad things. I mean, the things that are compelling us, so to speak, they're not necessarily bad things, that we're obligated to do things, that we're trying to keep the peace, or that we're just simply committed to our relationship. But you know, I mean, have you ever made a commitment to something and then find out sometimes you wish you hadn't committed yourself to that? I'm not talking about my marriage with that, by the way. Okay? Just a disclaimer on that one. But, right? But, you know, if you're committed to something, but I gave my word. I've been in situations where I've given my word that I was going to do this, and then I get there, and it ain't what I expected, but I already gave my word. So I already had to fulfill my word. So I was committed to it. I was obligated. It compelled me to go ahead and do what I said I was going to do because I was obligated. Then let's bring it to a spiritual level here. What compels you to do the things you do for the Lord? What compels you to do the things you do in faith? What compelled you to be here this morning? You know, honestly, a lot of people are compelled because they don't want to go to hell. We're compelled to be Christians. We're compelled to live a Christian life because of the fear of hell. Some people also maybe are compelled to do things, you know, in our Christian walk because we're trying to appease God. Because we see him as, you know, the big genie in the sky, and we got to just rub him the right way, that if we want to be blessed, we got to be good. You know, we see him as our big Santa Claus. It's like, been bad all year long, but come December, boy, we got to start being good because Santa's watching, right? You know, we want to get good gifts. And so some people, they treat God like that, you know what? I'm not doing it because it's right. I'm not doing it because because I love God, but doing it because I don't want God mad at me, because I recognize he's not the dude to have mad at me. Right? But, you know, that verse there in Matthew 5:41 there, it says, whoever compels you to go 1 mile. What he's saying there is he's saying, whoever forces you to do so much. Now, if you were to take this verse in context, you know, in Jesus' day, they were under Roman oppression, and the Roman government had it set up to where a soldier could just pick somebody, I believe it was picking a Jew, and just say, you know what, I need you to carry my armor, carry my gear for 1 mile. And by law, they were obligated to carry that soldier's gear and armor and all that stuff for 1 mile. They didn't have to go beyond 1 mile, but he had to go 1 mile. That was what he was forced to do. But Jesus is teaching us something different here. He's saying, don't just do what you're forced to do, but go beyond that. And there's so much of this that goes into all these areas of our life. And I'll tell you what, you do a little bit of reflecting. Maybe it's you, maybe it's people you know, but all of us know people that do just the minimum. And let me ask you this. How satisfied are those people in life? In my experience, they're usually kind of bitter, grumpy people because they haven't learned this yet. They haven't learned about going the extra mile. And I'm going to get into this here in a little bit. But he's talking about going beyond. And so he's talking about going beyond the compulsion, going beyond the forced level of what you're required to do. In 1 Samuel, chapter 18, verses 25 through 27, David gives us an example of going above and beyond. It says here, then Saul said, this is King Saul, he says, thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired, therefore David arose and went, he and his men, and killed 200 men of the Philistines, and David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. Now, one of the things that I picture this play out in your mind for a minute here. David's not necessarily aware that Saul's trying to kill him. But if you look in the backstory a little bit, Saul was trying to get him to become his son-in-law. Now this is twice. You know, and he kept saying, is it a light thing to become the king's son-in-law? In other words, David's saying, you know what, he's not even asking a dowry. He's just, you know, this doesn't make sense. And so it pleased David when King Saul gave the price. Gave a price to pay. You know, it tells us that it pleased him. And of course, it was under the pretense here to take vengeance on the king's enemies. David saw an opportunity here to both fulfill the desires of the king by taking vengeance on the king's enemy, as well as paying, I guess what you would call a handsome dowry for his wife to become the son-in-law. And so it was going to please the king and his future father-in-law to do this. And it says that he pleased him, and he says, you know what, the time hasn't expired. In other words, there was kind of a timetable on that when he had to get this done in. And David got his men together, and they went, and I could just imagine this. Anybody imagine this? I just imagine David walking in with a sack of 200 foreskins, dropping it on the table and saying, there's your dowry. You asked for 100, I brought you 200. Now, to me, that just shows me a lot about who David was. He was saying, you know what? This guy, King Saul, the king, my king, this would be David, my king, my future father-in-law, he wanted vengeance on his enemies, and he asked for 100, I'm going to give him 200. I'm stepping it up a notch. I'm going to be above and beyond what was asked. To me, this shows a lot about King David. Now, I really feel sorry for the guy that had to count those out, but it says it was given to him in full. You know, so somebody must have counted them. I didn't write it. It's in there. So, but you know what? He sought to please his king and his future father-in-law. He decided to go above and beyond. Now, you know, I don't know how many of you guys be willing to do that today. You know, that's a pretty big dowry. Saul there, he's like, I don't want any dowry. I don't want nothing much. Just 100 foreskins. That's it. That just seems like a reasonable request, right? But I really liked how David addressed that. He was just like, you know, and even if David knew that Saul was trying to kill him, I like it even better. Because then he's like, you know, you tried to kill me with only doing 100. I brought you 200. He stepped it up. He went above and beyond. In 2 Samuel, we see about some of David's men going above and beyond for him. 2 Samuel chapter 23, verses 15 and 16. And David said with longing, oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. Now I want to stop there for just a minute. David was just talking out loud. That's just saying, you know what, that sounds good for dinner tonight? A steak, you know, a nice fat ribeye. That sounds pretty good tonight. He's just talking, right? We can see this clearly in the story. He wasn't asking somebody to go get it. He was just saying, man, that sounds good, man. The water from that well, that's some good water over there. You know, it's kind of funny because during the summertime, you know, we go to mow over at the parsonage at Pastor Mark's. Guys will wait till we get to Pastor Mark's to fill their water bottle up because the water over there is really good. You know? And so he's just saying, man, I'd really like to have a drink from that well. That's some good water. But verse 16 says, so 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. Now, Take this into context. The king says, man, I want to drink of water from that well over there. That's some good water. And these three guys, they don't ask permission. They don't say, do you want us to go do this? They just say, you know what? The king wants a drink of water from that well. We're going to go get him a drink of water from that well. Oh, there's an army camped around it of our enemies. We don't care. They still went. And somebody had to carry a pitcher of water. They didn't like it. It had the water bottle they threw in a backpack. You know, they had to get back through the enemy camp as well to bring a pitcher of water. They risked their lives. I mean, it seemed like a suicide mission. 3 dudes going to go through the camp of the enemy to get a pitcher of water and come back? That was a suicide mission. But they said, you know what? This is what our king wants. This is our king's desire. We heard him say, oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well that's by Bethlehem. So what they do? They went and got it. It's important that we see here, they were not told to do it. They were not compelled. They were not obligated. They were not forced. The king didn't say, you 3 guys go get me a pitcher of water from the well. That's not what he said. He was just talking. And all of a sudden, those 3 men, they discovered a desire of their king's heart, and they went and they got it, no matter what the cost was. Now, those are some stand-up guys. You know, just we have to ask ourselves is, do we seek the desires of our king? Do we even seek the desires of our boss or our spouse? You know, one of the 10 Commandments, to honor thy mother and thy father, right? Do we seek what their desires are so that we could fulfill that? So that we could be like these 3 mighty men? By the way here, maybe I'm reading into this a little bit, but to me what makes these men mighty is what their action right here. It wasn't that they were necessarily just the greatest soldiers that David had. They may have been in that category, but to me what makes them mighty is that they said, my king desires a drink from this well, and I'm going to go get it. That's what makes them mighty. You know, we all should have a desire to be mighty men and women of God. That should be our desire. But we're not. I'm going to tell you something. We are not mighty men and women of God when we only do what we're compelled to do, when we only do what is required. You know, nobody ever gets Employee of the Month by just showing up to work and meeting their quota. You know, they're given that because they went above and beyond. We'll talk about the first mile versus the second mile just a little bit. In Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 through 24, I know many of you are familiar with this passage here, especially Teen Challenge guys that work under me, so I know this, right? Jacob has fond memories. So, it says, bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as man-pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. See, the first mile, going back to this first mile here, you do what you have to do. You're going to go through the motions. You're going to do the actions that are required of you because that's what you're supposed to do. And usually it's because somebody's watching. Whether that's your boss, whether that's your spouse, whether that's God. We do it because somebody's watching and we know this is what's required, so this is what we do. And I'm going to tell you something here. The Lord kind of showed me this just this morning on this. When we're doing something that we're forced to do, even if, it's not like someone's taking our hands and making us do that, but there's that obligation, there's that force because we know that we're being held accountable because somebody's watching us, because it's the right thing to do. When we do it out of those actions, it's a bondage. You're doing it because you have to. in that first one, you know what? Some examples of that. That's the flowers on Valentine's and anniversaries. You know what? I'm sure that you wives, you're thankful when your husband gets you your flowers on your anniversary and Valentine's and that sort of stuff. But tell me if I'm wrong. Is it not more important does it not mean more if it's a random Tuesday and he comes home from work with flowers? Because see, the first mile is doing it when we're obligated. When we're, in a sense, forced to. You know what? The first mile is meeting the quotas at work. Or doing what we have to do, just to keep our jobs. When we're working when the boss is looking. Even church attendance. Be that first mile, showing up to church. Because we'll get into this in a minute here, but just because you show up to church don't mean you're really at church. Praying over your meals. So many of us, we get in that. It's a real habit, and that becomes obligatory because it's what we do, right? We're Christians. We pray for our meals. And I'm not saying that none of these things are wrong, by the way. They're just the first mile. They're what you're supposed to do. Just like tithing, right? It's what we're supposed to do. So it's that first mile. But that second mile. Now this is what's important is the second mile. The second mile is when you go above and beyond. And see, this goes back to with what the Lord shared with me here. Is that when you go the second mile, you're operating in true freedom. Because you're no longer obligated. You're no longer forced. You're no longer compelled to go that second mile. Everybody hearing that? Just think about that for a minute. Let that sink in. That when you go, I think about this. I was just thinking, if I was in Jesus' day, I got a Roman soldier making me carry all of his gear for a mile. You know what? That first mile, he could be kicking at my heels, being like, "We ain't there yet. You got to keep going." And then when I get to the end of that first mile and I keep on walking, all of a sudden he can't say nothing to me no more because I done filled my obligation. I fulfilled what I was supposed to do. And now I'm operating in freedom because he ain't telling me I got to do it no more. Because that obligation, that burden, that bondage is gone, and I am operating in freedom because nobody's telling me what I got to do anymore. We go back to David's men. You know what? There were times I'm sure David told them men what to do. Of course, he was a king. They were his soldiers. Of course, he told them what to do. But when they went and they got that pitcher of water, they were operating in freedom because they weren't doing what they were told. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do. They were going above and beyond. And there's something really to be said about that. About going above and beyond what's required of us. Maybe what's the motivators for going above and beyond? Ultimately, it should be love. Some examples of the second mile. That's the flowers on a Tuesday, on some random Tuesday. Working, and exceeding your work quotas or whatever those parameters are given at work, not just meeting the deadline, but beating the deadline. Getting more done than what was expected. That's the second mile. Working when the boss isn't looking. Because, like in Colossians there it tells us, because we work for Jesus. We ain't working for him in the first place. We work for Jesus. Jesus sees us all the time anyhow. So he's always looking. But going that second mile, get this one here. Because this is, if you don't notice, I follow the first list here. Not just church attendance, but church participation. Being here, being involved, finding opportunities to be involved. When we're here, we're not just singing worship songs, but we're worshiping. There's a difference. Some people may spend their whole lives coming to church and never understand the difference between singing a song and worshiping God. I tell you what, it's hard for me to believe that anybody's worshiping God if they are worried about anybody else. Sometimes we're going to have embarrassing moments. One of the things that happens to me sometimes, of course, you all know I can't sing anyways, but sometimes I'm singing, I'm worshiping God, man, I get the lyrics out of order, and then I'm singing the wrong thing when everybody else is on the same song, right? Because I'm not paying attention to what's up here on the screen. I'm seeking the Lord. And you know what? My heart's worshiping, and sometimes it just ain't in line with what Scott's got going on up here. You know, it's like, oh, you catch yourself, you're chuckling, man. Get back into worship. You know, praying in private. And I tell you what, going the second mile here, because in the second mile, it's because we want to, right? We're not forced anymore. So if we're not forced, we're in the want to thing. I'm talking about praying. You ever think about just praying just because you want to visit with God? Just because you want to talk to Him. You know what? We call and we text everybody else in the free world. You know, sometimes I'll call my dad, or my dad will call me without anything specific to talk about, just to see how things are going. You know what? Shouldn't we do that with our Heavenly Father too? Just touch and base and say, hey, man, it's good to hear your voice. Good to spend time with you. You know, going beyond the first mile of tithing, that's where offerings come in, right? Biblically, tithing's required. Offerings are on top of that. That's going above and beyond. But is the 1 mile enough? You know, a lot of people really struggle with getting out of that mindset of, you know what, it's good enough. I still got my job. I still got my wife. They ain't kicked me out of church yet. Everything's good, right? I mean, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. You know, I'm living a Christian life. I am, you know, coming to church, singing at church. I'm paying my tithe, pray over my meals, read my Bible once in a while, try not to sin, ask for forgiveness when I do, you know, and then I'm going through these things, but, you know, is that enough? And what I'm talking about enough here, I'm not talking about your salvation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, is it enough? Understand that one day, each and every one of us is going to stand before Jesus and give an account of every idle word, everything we've ever done. And I think there's a lot of people going to show up on that day and say, Jesus, you saved me, here I am. Aren't you blessed? You know, I think about the parable of the talents. That guy that showed up, back up with one, he says, oh, you gave me a talent, here's what's yours. It didn't end well for that guy. But the other two, they went above and beyond. They did something. This next passage here, this is really what that kind of spearheaded me in this direction of this message this morning. It's out of Luke chapter 17, verses 7 through 10. Jesus says here, he says, and which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down and eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk. And afterward, you will eat and drink. Get this, starting at verse 9 here. Does he thank that servant because he did the things which were commanded of him? I think not. So likewise, you, when you have done all those things which you were commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what our duty, was our duty to do. You know, one of the things is I think that a lot of people want to get thanked for everything these days. Everybody wants their participation trophy, and I think we've developed a bit of a lazy society where we all want to feel appreciated. And by the way, with what I'm getting ready to share in this, I'm not saying we shouldn't be thankful, because we should be thankful for everything and in everything. But I'm talking about expecting thanks from others. You know, in this illustration, you know what Jesus is bringing out is that, do you think that when you've done the things that God has commanded you to do, He's going to thank you? Is He going to say, oh, thanks, man, you did exactly what you were supposed to do? But we've become lazy. People want to get thanked for doing their job. Pastor Mark, I get a thank you note every month from him. It's delivered through Sister Sherry. It's called a paycheck. I'm serious. You know what? If you're working for somebody and they're paying you and you only do what's required, why in the world would they give you a special thanks if you didn't go above and beyond? Because you haven't done anything. You haven't really profited them anything more than the agreement was for. Because he says here that we should say that we're unprofitable servants. Well, it doesn't. You might say, you know what? Yeah, I'm making him $10, or I'm making $10 an hour, and he's making $15 an hour off me, or whatever. And so he's making a profit. That's not what he's talking about. That's business. That's not the kind of profit I think he's talking about here. He's talking about a profit as in that above and beyond and doing something special, doing something that wasn't required, that you actually have blessed them by stepping out and going above and beyond. Sometimes spouses and our children and whatnot want to be thanked for pulling our own weight, you know. I try to thank my wife when she's done the dishes or something, but you know what? When I do the dishes, I don't walk around saying, hey, notice I did something today? Right? Why? I don't expect no thanks. I dirty dishes too. I probably dirty more than most because I do a lot of the cooking too, so I make a mess. But sometimes we come to God and act almost like He should be thanking us for being a part of His church. You know, He says there, and this I'm gonna paraphrase the end of that verse 10 there a little bit. Basically, He's saying, you know what? We've been unprofitable servants because we've only done our job. You know, sometimes, you know, you may hear someone tell someone else thanks, and you'd be like, man, I'm just doing my job. You know, I wasn't doing anything above and beyond. I was just doing my job. And Jesus is saying, you know what? We need to recognize that undoubtedly there's things we're called to do, there's things we're commanded to do, but those are our job. And I really believe that moving into our second mile here is where we need to be. Now, all these other things that we do, those are good. They're meaningful. They're purposeful. They should be done. But if you want to go into that second mile, you're going to need to find out what the desire of your boss is and go get it. You're going to need to find out what the desire of your spouse is and go get it. And most importantly here, you got to find out what the desire of your King, our God, is and go get it. Sometimes we're just sitting around waiting for God to say, you need to go and talk to that person, and sometimes He does, and that's great. Sometimes we're saying, you know what, I'm not involved in any kind of ministry because God hasn't told me to go be involved in some sort of ministry. Well, first of all, that's a load of baloney right there, because He told us all that we're supposed to go and witness. We're supposed to all go make disciples. You know, but we exclude ourselves and saying, oh man, well, He hasn't told me exactly what to do. You know, one of the things back before I come to Teen Challenge, I knew shortly after I was saved, I was called to ministry, and I was getting frustrated one day. At the time I worked for Dish Network, I was getting frustrated, and anybody ever get frustrated and pray to God when you're frustrated? Seems like that's when He answers the most, is when I'm frustrated about something or speaks real clear to me. And I was frustrated, and I was like, man, God, why am I putting in satellite dishes? You call me in ministry, and here I am. I'm waiting for you to tell me where to go, what I'm supposed to do, and you know, I'm putting in satellite dishes. You know what? He told me, because I asked him, I said, man, when are you going to give me my ministry that you've called me to? I know you called me, so when am I going to give it to him? He told me, he said, your life's a ministry. He says, you're in these people's houses every day, and you don't talk about me. And I made a decision that I was going to start talking to people. And I did. I remember having dispatch call me on the phone, wanting to know why I was taking so long to put in a satellite dish. Because I'm sitting there ministering to some lady that's crying on her couch. But you know, I'm not exaggerating. It was just a couple of months after I started doing that, God called me Teen Challenge. I really don't, if I hadn't started doing what he had called us all to do, he wasn't going to give me anything else. It was that simple. So we sat around saying, we ain't got nothing to do. There's lots to do. Jesus said, look, the field's ripe. It's ready. Pray that the Lord of the harvest would send workers to his field. You know what? And sometimes that means, saying, send me. Ask God, say, what do you got for me today? And sometimes you don't wait for him to command you to do it. You know what? He tells us to love on people and to share. Go do it. Just go do it. You'll see. You may get some backlash. So what? That's life. You're not going to make everybody happy. What I discovered with ministering to people, you minister to people, they want to hear it, great. You got an opportunity, man, keep going. If they don't want to hear it, shut up. You ain't going to force the gospel down their throat. But you know what? Bottom line here this morning is it's not acceptable just to do the minimum. It's not acceptable to do the minimum of 1 mile. But rather, I believe that God expects us to go above and beyond what's required of us in all things of our life. To go above and beyond. But most importantly, in our service to Him. And you can ask yourself this morning, say, what is the desire of my King? And how can I get it for Him? And then be like those mighty men. Raise up and be a mighty man or woman of God. Go get it for Him. Amen.